Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America. On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, we talk to prominent US citizens not just about their country's past and present, but also about its future. What, I ask my American guests, will be the 21st century fate of their now venerable republic? Hello everybody, Keen on America is back on the road again today. We are in Austin, Texas, talking to Pano Kanelos, the president of a new university, University of Austin. And as always on Keen on America, I began by asking Pano where and when he was born.
My name is Pano Kanelos. I was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1969.
What kind of childhood did you have in the Chicago of the early and mid-1970s, Pano?
Really rich, vibrant childhood. Because I was growing up in a kind of heavily Greek immigrant community, the community events were sort of the center of life, everything from going to every Sunday to the Greek Orthodox Church for liturgy to big family dinners, weddings, baptisms, festivals, lots of extended friends and family always in orbit. It was a very, very rich childhood.
Was there something uniquely American about this childhood in your mind?
I mean, I think that the immigrant experience is the American experience. I mean, I think that that's one of the, most distinctive and beautiful features about American culture is the ability of American society to embrace, welcome, absorb, acculturate wave after wave of immigrants. And my family certainly lived that experience.
When you were growing up, did you realize that in some ways you were different from the rest of your family, that your vocation was to the university? I think you were the first person in your not in your university, the first person in your family to go to a university.
Yeah, I can't recall a specific moment of clarity or epiphany. I mean, I was a very bookish young person, so I read all the time. My family were busy running the restaurant, but it just didn't seem that unusual. As I grew older and went to high school, my parents always supported the idea that I would go to college, even though they were not particularly familiar with the university system. They knew that it was a good. They knew that I loved to read, that I was sort of intellectually oriented, and it was never a question. There was never a conversation about not going to university. They allowed me to sort of take the lead, set the goal, and they supported it the entire time.
Do you remember if you ever heard the term American Dream when you were growing up?
I mean, yes. I mean, I'm sure I've heard it many, many times.
And what did it mean to you and your family? Self-realization, economic betterment?
I think so. I mean, I think it's from my perspective, from my family's vantage point, the American dream was that, the Greece of my father's childhood, post-World War II, was a very violent, impoverished place, very unstable civic culture, and he came to America, and there was opportunities that present themselves from the moment he arrived for financial betterment, to create a kind of stable environment for his family, to know that his children could pursue things above and beyond what he had opportunity to pursue. Same thing with my mother. And so for us, American Dream was about, let's say, a positive and hopeful orientation towards the future. Not necessarily letting go of the past. I mean, our roots are very important to us still, but remaining rooted yet reaching.
Was there always that tension? It seems to be a feature of many immigrant families, of course, most dramatically represented in The Godfather, of the traditional family with values and loyalties, perhaps outside the American state, and then another generation of kids who grow up in America who see another way of life, another kind of identity, or is that an over-dramatization?
I think it's probably a bit overplayed. I mean, you know, there are things you adopt when you're a young person growing up in this culture, born here, that are different than the mores of your family. I mean, nothing ever seemed particularly at odds with our family's values in that. I do, you know, even when I went to university and I would come home and, you know, my world was expanding personally. I mean, I was, you know, exposed to people and ideas and prospects that, you know, I never would have had had I just stayed put where I was with my family. But even coming home, I think, you know, when you have parents, when you have a family who have picked up stakes, left everything behind, took every risk, crossed the world, you know, created a new life. You know, I don't think they're put off by the fact that their kids, in some ways, are also picking up stakes and moving out in the world and creating a different life. So I never really experienced friction, not really.
Reinvention, renewal, is that the American way? Whether it's your parents who came from Greece, from a strife-torn place, to reinvent themselves, to you reinventing yourself, or at least renewing yourself in a sense, by going to the University of Chicago?
I don't know if it's a reinvention. I think it's a
realization.
Realization is, I think I like that term quite a bit better. The sort of fulfillment of something potential. You know, that you have a pathway, an opportunity to live into the full potential that you have as an individual. And I do think, you know, at least in my experience of American culture and growing up, that was the general theme. You know, that you could push farther, faster, beyond, you know, what those before you had done, without necessarily losing that connection that you had to them.
Was there an ideological quality to that? Panos, some historians, perhaps even critics of America, would trace that back to a Lockean notion of the tabula rasa, that we're born as empty slates and we take on earthly experience, and of course education is the most intense and concrete manifestation of earthly experience.
Look, I think sort of, let's say the DNA of the American founding is predominantly Lockean. That the idea that there's this thing called the pursuit of happiness, that human flourishing, that is in some sense the sort of telos of human life, and that one is self-fashioning in important ways in the pursuit of that. I mean, I think also things like, you know, the sanctity of property and you know, the value that labor adds to things are sort of built into the American DNA in a way that helps you, let's say, organize your aspirations in a particular way. If you live in a culture that's going to reward labor or respect property, then that gives you a kind of a way to advance, at least in material ways. I mean, I think the story is much more complex, and I think it does have to do with what we were talking about earlier, which is the kind of layering on of generation of people who are coming in from elsewhere with different sets of experience, different values, different cultural mores. That makes it more complex. I mean, I don't, you know, I mean, you know, I think to kind of flatten it out and just say that, you know, there's kind of an American, there's an American formula for prosperity or human happiness, and it sort of was planted at the beginning, and that everybody sort of plays by these particular rules or has the same goals or aspirations. I think it's much more complicated than that.
What about the counter-narrative, though, of your life? If your parents had chosen to stay in Greece and you'd grown up there, you probably would have turned out to be bookish. Do you think your life would have been that dramatically different?
I mean, it certainly would have been different. You know, I still have family in Greece, and so the kind of parallel lives are things that I'm aware of. Yeah, I don't. I mean, in particular in Greece, I think it's a little bit more difficult to advance in terms of social strata, but not impossible. Yeah, but I don't think, you know, like, would I have ended up like a shepherd or something? Like, I don't think so. You know, I probably would have went to university there.
Not all Greeks are shepherds.
No, but some still are. Like I would have gone to university there and maybe become a professor. I mean, those pathways are available there as they are here. And there, you know, and there is something about the Greek culture in general that's entrepreneurial and you know, there's a kind of pride and ambition that comes with, you know, professional advancement, forward advancement. I mean, it's not radically different. So I don't think my life would have been radically different, but it would have been materially different in some ways. Yeah.
You've had a glittering intellectual career. You went to Chicago. You taught at Stanford. You were university president. Now you're the president of a startup university. Are you happy with the way in which you gambled your talents, your abilities, your passions into the American education system? Do you sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, I could have been a lawyer, or I could have been a doctor?
No desire to be a lawyer or doctor.
Or a writer, or a traveler.
I'm extremely happy to have had the opportunity and privilege that I've had in my life. To go, you know, to get a bachelor's degree alone was a kind of, again, a kind of generational achievement, and then go on to get a Ph.D. and then to become a professor and be able to kind of live the life of the mind, and then convert that life of the mind into somebody who's involved with leading and building institutions. You know, I have no regrets. I've had a lot of, I mean, there are ups and downs along the way, like there are with anything, and certain anxieties and stress that come with it. You know, in my most stressful moments, you know, if, you know, my alternative fantasy life would be something like opening a wine bar and sort of, you know, sitting around, you know, drinking a nice Barolo and in the afternoon. Playing backgammon and something like that. But, you know, that's what vacations are for. So, look, I recognize that I am truly a person who's been granted very, very much in terms of opportunity and support, and I don't, whenever I doubt myself or my pathway, just reminding myself briefly of that resets everything pretty quickly.
How healthy is this educational engine of American democracy? It's an engine that is supposed to produce the meritocracy, the achievement, the opportunity, and the meaning of American democratic life. You've stayed in it all your life. You're clearly, what you're doing now in Austin, not entirely satisfied. But does it work? I mean, it's worked for you.
Yeah.
Clearly worked for many millions of people, especially after the Second World War.
You know, I think as long as America was and has been ascendant economically, our system of governance, our liberal democratic regime, has been a pretty good fit for that. I do think it was because there have been an overabundance of opportunities for people to advance who are willing to push themselves and to recognize opportunity. I think that system's worked pretty well. I do think as it feels like certain kind of institutions are starting to falter and kind of buckle under the weight of something. I don't know if it's if it's history, if it's just the kind of sheer sheer accumulation of some kind of cultural mismanagement. I don't know what it is, but it does feel like we live in a time where institutions are listing a little bit, and I do think that does create opportunity deficits. And so I have, as somebody who spends a lot of time with young people and young people at the university level, I do think it is harder today to provide opportunities for young people and to do that kind of sorting for merit, as we've historically been able to do pretty efficiently.
How deep, Panos, is the crisis? People talk about too many bureaucrats, the propagandistic nature of education, the inequality that the top universities seem to compound. Is it rotten, to borrow a word from Shakespeare?
It's rotting. Whether it's irredeemable remains to be seen. I do think what you say accords with my experience, that the kind of bureaucratization of education and higher education in particular, the kind of colonizing of academic institutions by mid-level managers who come with a different set of priorities, a different set of criteria for what a successful university should be. I do think that's a kind of corruption, and I do think that some of this is downstream just from the general massification of higher education. I mean, higher education went from being a relatively eccentric, elite, almost luxury item to being massified, to being a common good. And in that process of becoming a common good, the kind of expansion of higher education led to an expansion of the kind of bureaucratic infrastructure that supported it and then would help it grow. And then at some point, there's a kind of tipping point where you have more administrators than academics on campus, and then you start to see cultural drift.
Is this similar to other crises, parallel crises in the Republic, the healthcare system, for example, which has too many bureaucrats, and perhaps even the state itself? Do you see education, the crisis of the American university, as being different or similar to so much of what else is going on in the America of the 2020s?
It feels similar to me. It feels parallel. I'm not expert in the healthcare system.
I'm sure you've got medical insurance.
I do have medical insurance. I guess the way that I would answer that question is that I think from the perspective of education, I think all education is fundamentally liberal or illiberal. So it's either working to liberate the individual from ignorance, teach somebody how to be a free person exercising responsibility in a sort of moral and ethical way, in a way that attends upon human flourishing, or education is doing something else. It's sort of channeling people towards some other ends that are perhaps not aligned with their own individual flourishing or liberty. And so I think the more that an educational system becomes a system, the more the structure governs, the bureaucratic structure governs the academic experience, the less capable that institution is of producing free, open-minded, intellectually oriented students, graduates, scholars, etc.
You use the phrase, Panos, human flourishing. It seems as if in the 2020s in particular, most American humans anyway aren't flourishing. We live in an age of anxiety, rise of problems with mental health, anger in politics, the undermining of democracy. Is the crisis of the education, the high-end education system, is this a cause or a consequence of this crisis? Or I'm guessing probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's it's a good question. I do think it's both. If I had to unpack it, so I would say part of the crisis of higher education is because at a societal level, we are no longer supporting human flourishing in a sustainable way. So the issues that we have pervading society today, mental health issues, kind of just breakdown of kind of civic cohesiveness, and that sort of, as they make their way into universities, it makes it harder for universities to carry on their mission universities become more sort of engines of some sort of therapeutic renewal or something, and they're not really built for that, so that's hard. But I also think that universities in many ways have abdicated their responsibility to help us better understand what human flourishing is. Maybe one way to look at it is the kind of professionalization of universities, the idea that the primary purpose of university is to somehow prepare young people for their entry-level job or sort of professional life or that, and that's the kind of exclusive and narrow purpose of universities, and leaving out other things that I think are vitally important to, or should be important to the mission of university, which is just asking the large human questions, thinking deeply about what human flourishing is, what justice is, what is beauty, what are the good things that one should aim towards. I mean, when universities are no longer allowing those questions to be framed and queried and answered to some extent within the confines of the university, I think you start to see a human flourishing deficit. I think that's certainly part of the problem.
Are you saying anything different, Pano, from what, say, Alan Bloom, who of course was associated with your alma mater, University of Chicago, argued in The Closing of the American Mind? Sounds to me like, for better or worse, this is relatively similar, that people aren't thinking for themselves, that utilitarianism has taken over university, that the intellectual flourishing that the university was supposed to encourage has been done away with. Has anything changed since Bloom's Closing of the American Mind?
I think the problem has probably become more acute. I do think universities have traditionally been places that encourage kind of heterodoxy, where going against the grain of whatever cultural norms there were, whatever whatever was generally held to be true, like pushing against orthodoxies was seen as a kind of virtue, and yet I feel like that universities don't live up to that standard anymore. I think there's a kind of let's say I would call it a kind of moral cowardice that we find pervasive at universities, that whether it's because people are more concerned about career advancement or because of the kind of bureaucratic imposition of regulations and frames of thought and behavior, just kind of push independent thinking to the sides and marginalize it. I think universities are abdicating the responsibility they have. I mean, in my opinion, universities should be Socratic institutions. I mean, I think Socrates is the patron saint of the Western University. The job of Socrates and the job of the university should be simply to ask a question, and that question is, is X, is this thing that we believe, is this thing that we think, is this true? Is this truly the best answer we have? And to just keep asking that question over and over. That's what the critical mindset is. That's at the heart of the Western intellectual tradition, at the heart of Western universities. This ability to keep asking that question over and over again. I feel like universities today have stopped pressing, stop asking those questions, sort of to start accept a kind of, certain orthodoxies or certain, let's call them ideologies as, sacrosanct, as if we've reached the end of history, we've reached the end of thinking deeply about important issues, we have answers, and so now the job of a university is just to be an agent of action, to sort of put the answers that are readily available in front of us to all the human questions into practice. And I don't think that universities are living up to their responsibility when they think in that way.
You've gone from a comfortable academic existence to being a startup guy. You're one of the people involved. You're the president of the University of Austin, which is trying to do things quite differently. rebellious, revolutionary, certainly radical. Is there something particularly American about what you're trying to do at the University of Boston? Not so much perhaps in terms of the pedagogy, but the idea of starting something up, of renewal, of reinvention.
Yeah, look, the history of American universities is one of foundings. You know, I mean, in the sort of colonial period, and it is sort of in an invariable part of the sort of settling process was you'd sort of start a town, and then whatever particular denomination you belong to would found a college for educative purposes, to train students, to train pastors. The founding of colleges, the founding of universities, was the lifeblood of early America, and then the kind of evolution of many of those institutions from community-serving colleges to full-fledged universities in the 19th century was a sort of refounding. And at that point, when universities in America went from being essentially liberal arts colleges to being research universities, bringing on the German model, we saw another wave of true foundings. I mean, that's when Chicago was founded, and Stanford, and Hopkins, and that. And so there was this kind of, this sort of, explosion, really, of university foundings in the late 19th, early 20th century. And then things kind of tapered off, and a century has passed, and we really haven't seen a substantial number of new universities formed. And we certainly haven't seen the model challenged in any substantive ways. And yet things have changed radically over the past 125 years, economically, culturally, politically. And so it feels like, to address where we are at this moment in history, that founding new universities is essential, it's necessary.
There are critics of what you're trying to do. You're all too well aware of those, Pano. They will accuse you, I think, when they're being polite, of being conservative, of returning to a model that now is archaic. You said that we need to move forward. What's different about what you're trying to do from the elite universities of the early 20th century?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything even remotely, let's say, politically conservative about what we're doing. I mean, what we're trying to do is...
Well, sorry to interrupt here. There are a lot of quite powerful and intellectually distinguished conservatives who are supporting what you're doing.
Absolutely, and why shouldn't there be? I mean, there are a lot of powerful and distinguished people who are supporting what we're doing. And so if you're doing something that is really comprehensive and vital, then you receive support from, you should be receiving support from people who, organically disagree with each other about many or most things. So, I mean, a university should be a big tent community. And so if you fail to attract people who are conservatives, you're failing. If you only attract people who are conservatives, you're failing. And I think we've been pretty successful at attracting people from a broad range of ideas, opinions, backgrounds, beliefs. I mean, we have, on the one hand, we have Richard Dawkins on our advisory board, the world's most notorious atheist. And then one of our senior research professors is a Greek Orthodox monk from Mount Athos, who's a theologian and a scholar. And yet they both believe in the promise of this university. So it's I think it is we are let's say, I think a really extremely big tent community. But to your question about conservative, look, we believe in universities. We believe in higher education. We believe that universities have been, if not the most, among the most important institutions in Western culture, in world culture. And so there's quite a lot quite a lot to preserve, quite a lot to protect in terms of what universities have developed over time. So for us, having that kind of foundation is essential. We begin our undergraduate program, what we call the Intellectual Foundations Program, spending really kind of 2 years diving deeply into history, philosophy, literature, politics, the foundations of science, the foundations of mathematics, so that our students have a sense of where we've come from, what the great human questions have been, what some of the most compelling answers to those questions have been, how those answers have been in conflict with each other, so that we can kind of understand the genealogy of who we are. And then when you have a sense of that, then you're better positioned to understand where we should go. And so the latter part of this education is really about what are we going to build? How are we going to take the things that we have today, the scientific knowledge, the kind of cultural awareness that we have, and build new things, create new things, innovate. How are we going to craft a future that is, well, if not the best, it could be better than it would be if we were not putting the work we're putting into it.
But why is that different from the kind of education you got, for example, at the University of Chicago? I don't mean this question critically.
Yeah.
I mean, you study the great works, you do some science, you bring in smart kids, and they realize themselves. It doesn't sound particularly, and I don't mean this critically, it doesn't sound particularly innovative.
Well, like I said, we're not reinventing the wheel. I think we're trying to renew the spirit of that. The studying of the great works at even like a place like University of Chicago is a relatively minor and marginal part of the experience. I mean, it's nominal. It wasn't always that way. So bringing that back with intentionality, with force, I think is important. Bringing bright kids together and activating in them a sense of ambition, a sense of curiosity. This isn't a novel thing, but it's something you do with intentionality. But when you construct a curriculum that really is intended to ground students in a kind of knowledge, awareness, critical awareness of everything that has brought us and them to this moment, what you're really cultivating in them is a kind of prudence or wisdom in terms of how to act in the future. And so, we've crafted the curriculum in a way that really is meant to provide structured opportunities for innovation, creation, et cetera. Every one of our students, for example, every single student undertakes a 4-year-long Polaris project. So Polaris is the North Star. We help them identify from the moment they come on campus, help them start thinking about what are my greatest gifts? What are the things that I'm good at or called to do? What are the things that bring me pleasure? What are the things that give my life meaning? And how do I take those things and apply my gifts, my greatest gifts to the world's greatest need? How do I identify the ways in which I can apply that? Universities don't think like this. They don't act like this. They don't have the kind of self-reflective quality to cultivate this awareness in their students and then to channel that. So our students, as part of the Polaris Project, the first year they're really deep in, let's call it vocational and personal reflection in class, thinking about all the things that I mentioned. And then they have to come up with let's call it a moonshot project, where they're thinking about...
Sounds like Google. They have their moonshot project.
It does sound like Google, but it's within the context of a learning environment and educational experience. And so what we're helping them do is think about, what is that moonshot project? How do we as a university teach you how to conceptualize, design, execute on, achieve something that you'll find extraordinary? All right, so this is, again, built into our curriculum. And it's not, many universities have like a center for entrepreneurship and innovation, and maybe some engineering students participate in projects there. Even if you're doing poetry at the university here, or you're studying politics, or you're doing mechanical engineering, whatever, everybody has to have their own Polaris project. So the way that I think about it is we have foundational knowledge, and then we have aspirational activities. So we go from intellectual foundations to the North Star, to that thing that we're aiming for. And when you create this as your kind of central operating system for a university, the coursework, the courses of study in that, they take different form and different shape. So in that sense, it's innovative. And so far, I think it's proving, even before our students arrive, proving very successful. I mean, I will tell you, I've had probably 20 or 30 conversations with students who are already starting to think about Polaris projects. Some of them have actually started these projects. So they're going into the university knowing that this is really core to what's expected of them.
Pano, it's interesting you use the phrase central operating system, a technical term, of course, used by the computer community. A lot of the, I think you've raised almost $200 million, a lot of the money is coming from Silicon Valley. Is, for better or worse, Silicon Valley inventing a new operating system for the 21st century, more than just AI or some Google or Microsoft or Apple or Amazon operating system, a platform? Is Silicon Valley contributing to a new way of thinking about the world with the X project, Polaris, operating systems, that now you at the University of Austin, and I'm sure there'll be other startups, will also begin to pioneer?
I think so. I mean, I think that's right. And again, being in Austin as a city, I mean, Austin as a place is sort of an epicenter for a lot of this activity that's going on. I think that's right, but I think what, we're sort of aware that young people today, their dream is not to go work for Goldman Sachs. Their dream is not even really to go to law school anymore. Their dream is to become, an entrepreneur, to start a company, to create a technology. We live in a world that really rewards pioneers, and sort of maverick thinkers and that. And knowing that that's the world that we're in, one of the questions we asked ourselves as a university is, okay, if that's where we're going, how do we as a university tether those sorts of ambitions, tether that kind of directionality to things that are humane, to not just the pursuit of advanced operating systems, but the pursuit of wisdom. All right, if the world is going to be disproportionately affected by the future generations of tech innovators or business entrepreneurs and that, how do we instill in them the capacity, the desire to ask and answer the fundamental human questions? So I do think in many ways, we're cognizant of what you're laying out, which is this sort of I think the world is, in the 19th century, the world was shaped by the great industrialist. In the 21st century, there's a new version of that. These are the sort of the kind of the tech superstars and that, and we want to make sure that as they're shaping the world, that they themselves are being shaped in ways that will keep them on track to do things that are responsible, ethical, and truly advancing human flourishing.
Final question, Pano. You've been very, very generous with your time. We're talking in August of 2024 in Austin. Temperature outside is in the low hundreds, 102, 104 when I came out. It's unbearable. I take your point about human flourishing and open-mindedness. I don't think many people would disagree with you. Some people on the left might have their own narrative, but it makes sense. On the other hand, are we missing the really big issue in terms of the gorilla in the room, the destruction of the environment, global warming, making places like Austin, Texas uninhabitable in the not too distant future? Should startup education establishments like your own, and perhaps even all tech companies, should they be focusing on this imminent existential crisis, or have I got it wrong?
I mean, should that be an activity of the university, a concern of the university?
Should it be the thing in itself, to borrow a term from the philosophers?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that's the thing in and of itself. I mean, I think the universities exist for the advancement, the discovery of knowledge, the transmission of knowledge, and the preservation of knowledge. That's what these institutions have. That's a particular responsibility of these institutions. Does that include a kind of that people at the university may be concerned about the environment or climate change, or be interested in asking those particular questions or trying to find solutions, of course. But the university itself has a different calling, a higher purpose, and that's ultimately what universities should be committed to.
Well, Pano Kanelos, I want to thank you so much for your time. For people watching or listening to this who want to learn more about your very interesting educational startup, how do they do that?
Not surprisingly, we have a website. It's uaustin, letter U, austin.org. We also have a fantastic Substack. It's UATX, I think it's called UATX Online, and where we sort of keep everything up to date on what's happening at the university. So please check those out.